goes to one of our other acknowledgements that we've made and want to put to you, and that was we've acknowledged that the business model of loot boxes, especially in free-to-play games, is too attractive to game publishers to remove from their games. And so the question to you is that if that's been around...
No, I wouldn't agree with that.
And so
Yes,
why
it's
is it so
attractive.
difficult for game publishers to self-regulate? Why are we at this point now where we looks like we're going to have a regulation from an external force potentially, and the publishers themselves have done very little to actually self-regulate?
I wouldn't underestimate the difficulty of self-regulation, and this is not in any way a comment directed at you, Spike. It's more a response to the statement
Sure.
itself. It's easy to state that self-regulation ought to happen. It is rather more difficult to actually put it into practice. Any form of efficient regulation is difficult. Any form of regulation requires to be tested and to evolve over time. And there are no easy, good ways of doing this. What is it we're actually talking about? We're talking about taking a variety of disparate businesses that may or may not have good business relationships with each other. They may not, to look at the different ways that they approach matters, which inevitably involve raising sensitive commercial and confidential material, and to ask them to then share and form some form of standardization. Would that work? Does that raise competition issues? Are there other issues there they need to be careful of as a result? We've already got problems of confidentiality, commercial competition, and antitrust issues that have just been talked about right there. And so you've immediately started raising a bunch of other problems you've got to deal with. And then you've got to try to interpret the existing rules, because you've got to base the regulation off something.
Yeah.
So then then you end up in a group of different professionals applying the rules in different ways, and it starts becoming a lot harder. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not impossible, and I agree with you. Self-regulation ought to be happening. It's the way that the games industry ought to be taking it forward. I'm simply saying, let's not underestimate how difficult that can be. But I appreciate that at the same time.
Yeah.
The answer to that is, yeah, but if you don't do it, someone's going to do it for you, right?
I think there's a couple of things I'd take out of that. Being involved in that OFT piece, hands-on back in the day, being involved in the age ratings, the pan-European age ratings. With the age ratings, the difference was that you had retailers who were mandated by law not to have a game without an age rating. You had platforms, the console platforms, who just wouldn't allow you to release your game unless it had a rating. So everything had to get rated. So you just got stuff rated and you did that. Truth of the matter is, at the moment, is that there is no compulsion to rate your game. If you're publishing on PC, for example, you don't have to put a rating on it. It's a nice thing to do, but you don't have to do it because we've gone far more global. I mean, we are a global industry now. And so I think Jazz makes a really good point. It's all very well having code of conducts and signing up to, self-regulation, but actually most large companies aren't nimble enough to do much about it. And they'll say, show us the law, show it burning in my face, and then I'll do something about it.
But then there's other factors as well. It goes back to the lack of research, right? So you can go right back to some old school legal philosophy here about why do people follow laws in the first place? And yes, there is the threat of punishment, sure, but there's also a concept which is much underrated and is often a reason to follow the law because it's the right thing to do, even if the law is not always clear. You can see, and often these days, research and actual evidence helps. Were there to be more credible international research that is showing the harm to customers, I imagine that may be more of a factor theoretically in businesses deciding to take different business steps because either it's just the right thing to do from an ethical perspective, or you come up with evidence that shows that actually your business interests are perhaps not being advanced by doing this in the right way. So this lack of evidence undermines other reasons why you might have self-regulation or why companies might be more inclined to follow the law. It's not just about the sanctions risk.
I totally agree with you. And I think that in that really well put sort of argument, I think we're going to come into a world of far more ethical decision making from the players, that as they start to get more informed about what goes around this from an ethical perspective, they will make decisions, and that could affect how games become and retain their popularity.
Yeah.
But it does require a body of evidence built that is constantly being added to by research, and someone's got to pay for that. And that therein lies the next issue: is who pays for that evidence to be brought together? Because if it's the games companies, and the evidence produced doesn't suit the games company narrative, rightly or wrongly, I mean, are you going to continue to pay for evidence to show that you make a game that really is harming people?
Yeah, I guess that's a point. And another point still, which the games industry has been particularly good at, is to avoid or to mitigate problems by finding business solutions to them. One of the things that I was just thinking about as you were talking, back in the old days of talking about virtual worlds, was the idea of virtual property and treating virtual property as a property right, something that you could sell, you could pass on. I wonder what would happen to the loot box debate if in certain games that then was treated as an entry point into a wider property ecosystem, and you could trade those things going forward. It wouldn't necessarily deal with a number of issues regarding alleged addiction and things like that, but it would change the debate somewhat, because you're acquiring a property interest in something which is tradable, which gives you some value back.
Well, it would also start to ask questions around taxation, because you're suddenly in
then you, and that's one of the reasons why you don't have the virtual property debates remained academic, because there are so many practical problems with them.
Just imagine.
So I guess what I'm saying is, maybe this is just my particular slant as a lawyer, it's that we absolutely shouldn't be rushing to legislate. We shouldn't be rushing even necessarily to self-regulate. We should be looking at what the actual evidence is. We should be looking at the available body of regulation and self-regulation. And we should also be looking, particularly as the games industry, at innovations that allow us to mitigate some of the risks that we've identified without necessarily needing to coerce anyone or anything like that. I mean, it's the same kind of thing if you want to take an extreme example with piracy. You know, is piracy as secondhand sales going to be the end of the games industry? Well, the funny thing is free-to-play is the answer to all of that. Why don't we have such a problem in the games industry with piracy? Because of free-to-play. Free-to-play may have some other issues that have come up in respect of it, like loot boxes. Okay, well, is there a business solution to that?